Hey rail fans, welcome. In this video I'm going to do some more work on my new Pennsylvania Railroad switching layout. And in this one I'm taking the track plan that I came up with and transferring that onto the benchwork itself, and then I'm going to get the cork laid down and get everything set so that I can start laying the track pretty soon. So with that, let's head over to the benchwork and I'll show you what I've got. Hey guys, okay, so you can see here I've got the layout sort of mocked up. I've got some engines and cars down, and I've sort of put some foam together to represent the footprint of some of the various buildings and industries I'm going to have. And I wanted to do this, again, because this is a rather compact layout, and I normally don't do this. This is actually one of the first layouts that I've done a full mock-up like this on, but because it is so compressed and so tight, I wanted to make sure it was the plan I wanted prior to building it. And this actually is not the first one I mocked up. This is, for this plan, this is the second plan I mocked up, because the first plan I actually found that I didn't like quite as well as I thought. So I made a couple minor changes, and so now I've mocked this one up, and I think this is the plan I'm going to go with. I like this one quite a bit. And so one of the things I checked on here is to make sure it sort of overall looks right and feels right to me, sort of in my head map out of where engines and cars would be moving and where they would be going. Check the distance on some of the sidings, and especially there's a runaround down here. I wanted to check and make sure that that was going to give me the right size train I wanted, and just overall get a little bit more feel for how the layout's going to look prior to go ahead and laying track. But now, since I've decided I do like this one and this is the one I'm going to go with, the next step is to go ahead and transfer this track plan from the paper that is printed on down onto the foam, which is the top of the benchwork that I built. And so let me get all this stuff off, and then I'll show you how I'm going to do that. Okay, so now that I've got all that cleared off, I can go ahead and start marking where my track is. And in this case, I'm going to mark the center line because I'm going to be putting on a cork track, and because of the way you split them in half and put them together, you just need to mark the center line. And I'll actually do that with a marker. And I do it in two ways. I'll actually, describe down the center of where the track is. And as one of the advantages of having foam on the top is by applying that little bit of pressure, you can actually make a small indentation there. And then when you lift the track plan up, it'll give you enough of an indication where it's supposed to be. You can go back and then take your marker and mark it, and then you'll end up with a nice diagram of where you need to put your roadbed. Okay, so here is all the track plan marked now on the top of the foam. Now, one thing I didn't do is when I was tracing these lines and then go back and mark them, I didn't use a straight edge or anything. I just drew them in real quickly. And so now when I go and I put the cork down, I won't adhere to this black line completely. What I'll do is use that as a guide as to where I put my cork down. And then I'll actually bring in, my straight edge to make sure that my cork is running nice and straight, through the areas that need to be. And also, as I'm laying that, I'm going to very regularly bring in the sections of track and set them down on it to make sure that I'm getting the right geometry with the cork. Now for this layout, I'm going to go ahead and use Cork Roadbed, and I've used the foam roadbed as well in the past, and they're both actually found to be pretty similar. Just for this one I decided to go ahead and use cork. Now this one on the end here, I'm going to do a little differently. Normally, those of you who've used cork before, you actually peel them apart into two separate strips, and then you lay those individual strips around, and that allows you to get curves and things in it, and already gives you a nice profile for the ballast. And that's great for most applications. However, on this end here, the look I'm going for is sort of an older, not very used yard area, and it's not really a full yard. It's just sort of an area where they stick cars temporarily while they're waiting to take them to industries. And so the look I'm going for there is something that actually doesn't have a lot of nice groomed ballast on it, that the dirt is actually coming up near the ties and the rails, and there's a little bit of ballast in there, but really it almost, if you've seen some pictures where it looks like just rails going through the dirt and you almost don't even see the ties and ballast. That's almost the look I'm going for. And because of that, I'm going to lay my cork a little bit differently in this one little section. Instead of actually laying individual strips of cork along the center line, here I'm essentially going to turn this into a cork sheet by laying several of these upside down, where they're still connected, together. And then that will put my track right up at almost ground level without having a nice groomed profile for the ballast. And in doing this, it actually doesn't take up any more, or not much more, of the cork than it would otherwise. I've got 4 tracks in here, and so if I split my cork and put it down, I'd use 4 pieces. But in this case, when I just do this whole cork sheet, or turn these into a cork sheet, I just use up 5 of them. So it's really only costing me 1 strip of cork to get that look. And so I want to go ahead and kind of do it. And this will be the only part of the layout that kind of has this look, and so I kind of wanted to get that. The rest of it is going to have regular groomed ballast on it, and so I'll put the cork down regular for that part. Now you can, or I could have purchased just a cork sheet to go in this area, but I ended up not buying a cork sheet. I didn't have it on hand. I do have a lot of cork on hand though, so I can just put it down like this. And then the adhesive, the way I actually glue it down, I actually just use liquid nails contact cement, or construction adhesive, liquid nails construction adhesive. And I find that works really well. There's lots of other adhesives that you can glue the cork down with. I find that to be relatively inexpensive, easy to use. The one key with it, though, and I'll show you how I put it down, is you want to keep it sort of a thin bead. You don't want to have a whole bunch of adhesive in one area where it's big and goopy, because that can give bumps and undulations and rises in your cork. You want to kind of put it down and then spread it thin, and then put your cork down. Okay, so like I mentioned, you put the glue down, and in this area I'm not really following the center lines. In the other parts of the layout I will. But I'm just covering this area with glue, and then after you get it down, just go ahead and use something to spread it thin, like I mentioned. And I'd recommend using something disposable, not using like a trowel or a putty knife, because the glue will harden on whatever you're using to spread it rather quickly, and it's kind of hard to get off. I've had to throw away a couple putty knives using them. So just use a piece of cardboard, it'll work fine. And then put your cork down on it and press down not too much. You don't really have to weight it down, but just push it into the glue. And I would recommend working in relatively small sections of just a couple feet at a time, because the glue does start drying pretty rapidly. And if it starts drying and everything, even though it's not completely secure, it won't really adhere to the underside of the cork real well, and your cork can come loose. And through the magic of software editing, we'll go ahead and compress about 20 minutes of laying cork here into 2 minutes, so you can just see the technique I'm using and the process of putting the cork down. Now, in addition to using a straight edge to ensure my tracks were straight, I also used a string line and would pull that taut along where the center line of the track should be, and that way I could ensure that my cork roadbed was going down along that center line. Okay guys, now there's a couple different ways you can tie your cork together when it's diverging or splitting because of like a switch or something. And I'll show you one of them here, and that's to cut a notch out of what in this example would be like your mainline track, and then slide the roadbed that was going to be underneath the siding track into those notches. And so there's a couple things you have to do with this. You can see I've already done one piece of cork, and now I'm working on the other one. And one of the things you're going to want to do is cut the bevel off of your cork, or else you're going to end up with a sort of a divot, a little wedge in your roadbed there. And so mark how far back you have to cut the cork off that bevel, and then cut that bevel off. And then once that's done, you can go ahead and then put your cork in place and actually trace on the other roadbed the size notch that you will have to cut out. And once this is traced, you can just use an X-Acto knife to go ahead and cut your cork. One thing is just be cautious that you're not ripping up the cork around it, that you are slicing through the cork nice and cleanly and just cutting it out. And with that done, now I will test fit the pieces of cork to make sure they are on the center line of the diverging route. And then they look good, and then I'll go ahead and glue them in place. Another way you can splice the roadbed together is essentially by laying the one of the pieces of cork along the main line, and then have the other one turn and go down the diverging route, which sort of gives you a Y shape, and then slide the other pieces of cork in up until they touch. And then what that gives you is you end up with a wedge piece that you'll have to then fill in with cork. And then, so just cut and trim your pieces of cork, and a lot of times you can use little scrap pieces you've got, if they happen to be just long enough, and fill in this wedge piece. Again, remember to trim that bevel off of your roadbed so that you don't have that little triangle indentation in it. And then just cut it to fit. And this will be a little bit of trial and error of trying to figure out exactly the size cork you need to fill in the gap. But you just fill it in, and in the end, you end up with sort of the same thing as the other method. It is, just a nice smooth piece of cork as the two tracks diverge from one another. Okay, guys. Now I've let this sit overnight. All of my cork is in, and it's nice and dry, and it's almost finished, but it's not quite. There's two additional steps that I do. The first of which is I go ahead and sand all the cork down. This is 100 grit sandpaper, and you go ahead and sand the surface to make sure it's nice and level, and then sand the beveled edge some, because that can sometimes be kind of rough. And so go ahead and sand that, get rid of any loose pieces of cork or anything that's sticking up or isn't completely level and is going to interfere with my track. And so you do that, and then go ahead and give it a good vacuuming, and then we're almost ready to put track down. Alright, well, I have finished sanding all of the roadbed now, and I vacuumed everything up so it's nice and clean. And then the last step that I'd recommend, and certainly you can see I've done it here, is go ahead and take your track, especially your switches and crossovers and things, and lay them out where they're supposed to be based upon your track plan, and ensure that you've got the roadbed where it needs to be and that it's nice and centered underneath your tracks. And go ahead and sight down the line and make sure everything is good and square, because all of this will ultimately depend or determine how well your trains run on them, because you need good quality bench work, good roadbed, and good track work in order to ensure you've got good running trains, and that ultimately is a big determinant in whether you're going to enjoy your layout or not. And so before you jump right into starting to lay tracks, go ahead and take a little bit and set it out, make sure it's good, and then don't hesitate if something's wrong with one of these. If your track is not square, if it's hanging off the edge and everything because you've put your roadbed in a slightly wrong spot, take the time to go ahead and rip up that roadbed and relay it where it's supposed to be, and it will pay off in the future. Because what you don't want to have happen is you rush it right now and then you have to do major modifications later after you've got scenery and track laid and stuff. So, but with that, I'm going to go ahead and finish this up. And until next time, keep running your trains, keep enjoying them, and we'll catch you at the next update.